Jean watched the rain slide down the thick glass of the observation deck. Each drop traced a path through the grime on the outside, a grime no one would ever clean again. Below, the city of Busan was a ghost of light and motion. He could see the frantic movement in the streets, the endless lines of people and vehicles heading towards the spaceports. But from up here, there was only the soft, steady sound of the rain and the hum of the ship being loaded. His sister, Su-min, walked up beside him. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there, her arms crossed, looking down at the planet they were about to leave forever. They finished packing the last of the agricultural cores, Jean said, his voice flat. The Odyssey's promise will be ready for final boarding in 12 hours. Su-min nodded slowly. I have the final cultural data packets. The last transport is bringing them from the Seoul archive now. This was their work. Jean was a logistics coordinator. His job was to make sure people, food, and machines got onto the right ships. Su-min was a cultural archivist. Her job was to make sure memories, art, and stories did the same. They were both trying to save what they could of humanity. One was saving its body, the other its soul. The order from the Galactic Consensus had come 100 years ago. They were a powerful group of alien species, so old and so advanced that they saw humans as little more than noisy, messy children. They did not like how quickly humans had spread, how emotional they were, how unpredictable. They said humanity was a threat to the perfect stability of the galaxy. They did not ask. They told. They gave humanity a century to leave its home system, Earth, Mars, the moon colonies. All of it.at first. People did not believe it. They thought it was a joke, a trick. Then the consensus showed their power. They did not attack Earth. That would have been too direct. Instead, they pointed a weapon at Jupiter. In a silent, terrifying flash, the gas giant ignited into a small, temporary star. It burned for a week, a second sun in the sky, a constant reminder of a power so great it could light a match on a planet. The message was clear. You are not being invited to leave. You are being forced. Disobey and you will be erased. So now, a century later, the last humans were leaving. Jin's work terminal beeped. A new alert. Problem. There was always a problem. This one was about a group of 300 people whose transport ship had failed its final engine check. They were stuck on the ground, and their assigned spot on the Odyssey's promise was in jeopardy. I have to go, Jean said, turning from the window. The spell of quiet sadness was broken. The immediate crisis was back. Su-min put a hand on his arm. Be careful down there. The crowds. They are getting desperate. He nodded and left. The streets of Busan were chaos. The rain did nothing to wash away the fear. It just made everything cold and wet. People pushed and shouted. They carried suitcases, boxes, and crying children. They all had the same wide, terrified look in their eyes. They were leaving their homes, their streets, the graves of their ancestors, everything they had ever known. And for what? For a cold metal ship and a journey into an empty, unknown darkness. Jean moved through the crowd, his official uniform allowing him to pass through security checkpoints. He reached the stalled transport. The engineer, a young woman with grease on her face, looked up at him, her expression hopeless. It's the primary ignition coil, she said, her voice shaking. We don't have a spare. The warehouses were cleared out days ago. Jean looked at the 300 people huddled under a makeshift shelter from the rain. They watched him, their faces pale. He saw an old man holding a small, native bonsai tree in a pot. He saw a mother trying to calm her twin babies. They were just people, ordinary people, and they were about to be left behind because of a broken machine part. He couldn't let that happen. Jean got on his comms unit. He started calling every contact he had. He bypassed official channels. He called in every favor he was ever owed. He knew a man who had a warehouse on the outskirts of the city that was supposed to be empty. After an hour of frantic calls, of begging and threatening, a small, rust-covered truck arrived. A man jumped out, threw open the back, and there it was, a single, pristine ignition coil. The engineer stared in disbelief. How? Don't ask, Jean said. his body trembling with relief and exhaustion. Just install it. You have 6 hours. While Jean was fighting to save 300 lives, Sumin was fighting a different battle. She was in the massive, echoing hangar of the Odyssey's Promise, overseeing the loading of the cultural archive. It wasn't just data. There were physical objects too. An original copy of the Gutenberg Bible, a sculpture by Michelangelo, a handwritten manuscript of a symphony by a composer who had died centuries ago. Her team was loading a crate containing a collection of traditional Korean folk instruments, a gaegeum, a hegium, a jango drum. They were careful, but they were also fast. Time was the enemy. Sumin's personal quest, however, was smaller. Tucked away in her bag was a data chip containing the entire Library of Congress, the British Museum's digital collection, and every piece of art and music from 100 different cultures. But it wasn't enough. She needed something real, something she could touch. She remembered her grandmother. She remembered her singing an old Pan's-Ori song, a story of a woman waiting for her lover who never returned. The raw emotion in her grandmother's voice, the way her hands moved, the tears in her eyes, that was humanity. That was what they were losing. She knew the National Museum in Seoul had been digitally scanned, but the physical artifacts were being left behind. It was considered a waste of space. Among them was a simple, handwritten songbook of Pan's-Ori lyrics, annotated by a famous singer from the early 21st century. It was not famous. It was not unique in a historical sense. But to Sumin, it was a piece of a soul. She made a decision. As the final loading for her section was completed, she told her assistant she was doing one last check. She took a small, fast flyer and sped towards Seoul. The city was a darker, quieter version of Busan. Most people were already gone. The museum was unlocked, its alarms dead. She walked through the grand, empty halls, her footsteps echoing. She found the display case. She used a small tool to break the lock. Her hands shook as she picked up the simple, cloth-bound book. It was small, fit in her bag, but it felt heavier than any data chip. She was stealing a memory from a dead world. On her way back, her flyer was scanned by a consensus observation drone. It was a silent, black, diamond-shaped thing that hung in the sky. It did nothing. It just watched. It watched humanity pack up its things and go. The sheer indifference of it made Sumin's blood run cold. They weren't even enemies worth fighting. They were just a problem to be removed. She made it back to the Odyssey's Promise just as the final boarding calls were echoing through the ship. She found Jean on the observation deck again. He looked exhausted. "Did you get them on?" Sumin asked. "The 300? Yes," Jean said. "They're on. Their ship docked an hour ago." He didn't sound triumphant. He just sounded tired. Sumin didn't tell him about the songbook. She just stood beside him. The great ship began to vibrate. A deep, powerful hum filled the air. The engines were coming online. The view on the screen shifted from the rain-soaked city to the blackness of space. The ship was moving. Jean and Sumin watched as the Earth began to shrink. The beautiful blue and white marble, the home of all their ancestors, got smaller and smaller. They saw the moon pass by. They saw Mars, now also empty of human life, become a red dot. The galactic consensus had won. They had forced the humans to leave. Jean put a hand on the cold screen. Sumin touched the cloth-bound book in her pocket. The Earth became a pale blue dot. Then it became a speck of dust. Then it was gone, lost in the vast, star-filled blackness. The Odyssey's Promise, and the thousands of ships with it, turned towards the dark. They were alone. They had lost their home. But as the ship flew into the unknown, Sumin knew something the consensus did not. They had taken the body of humanity, but they had left its heart behind. And a heart, once broken, can learn to beat again, even in the cold void of space. The price for this exile had been set. It was a debt, and one day someone would have to pay. The metal corridor echoed with the sound of Jin's footsteps. It was a sound he had known for 50 years. The low, constant hum of the ship's engines was the background music to his life now. He walked past door after door, each one the same dull gray. This was the Odyssey's promise, one of the largest ships in the human fleet. It was not a planet. It was a machine, a home that was always moving, never arriving. Gene was an old man now. His hair was white and thin. His hands, which once moved quickly over logistics screens, now had a slight shake. He still worked in logistics, but he was not the coordinator anymore. He was an advisor, a voice of experience. The young people called him teacher. He walked slowly, using a cane for support. The low gravity of the ship helped, but his body was still tired. A lifetime of stress and hard work had taken its price. He entered the main greenhouse. This was his favorite place. Under the bright, artificial lights, rows of plants grew in water, not soil. The air smelled of damp earth and green leaves. It was the closest thing to a park on the ship. Children were allowed to come here for 1 hour a day to see what real, growing things looked like. Gene often saw them, their small hands gently touching the lettuce leaves, their eyes wide with wonder at something he had taken for granted his whole life. His sister, Sumin, was in the greenhouse, waiting for him by the tomato plants. She was also old, but where Jin's body seemed to be giving up, Sumin's energy was still fierce, burning in her dark eyes. She was the head of the cultural archive. Everyone called her Keeper. She was holding a small tablet. "The council meeting is in 1 hour," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Taeshik will try again. I know it." Jean sighed and reached out to steady himself on a metal support beam. Taeshik. The name was like a headache. Taeshik was a leader of a large and growing group of people. He was a man in his prime, strong and confident. He believed the human fleet needed to change. He said they needed to forget the past. "He is not a bad man, Sumin," Jean said quietly. "He is just practical." "He is a fool," Sumin snapped. "He thinks if we throw away our history, we will be stronger. He wants to cut our own roots and wonder why the tree is dying." The argument was tearing the fleet apart. On one side were people like Taeshik, the adaptationists. They said that clinging to Earth was a sickness. It made people sad. It made them weak. They pointed to the limited resources on the ships. They asked why they were using power and computer memory to store old songs and pictures of dead planets. They said humanity needed to become something new, a species of the void, with no attachments. On the other side were the Keepers, led by Sumin. They believed that their humanity was in their history. Their art, their music, their stories were what made them different from the aliens who had thrown them out. To forget Earth, they said, was to let the consensus win completely. It was a spiritual death. Gene was caught in the middle. He understood both sides. He had spent his life managing limited resources. He knew the cost of every gram of oxygen, every watt of power. But he also remembered the rain on Earth. He remembered the feel of real sun on his face. He could not let that go. The council meeting was held in the ship's largest meeting room. It was a circular room with a wide view screen that usually showed the starfield outside. Today it was dark. Taeshik stood up to speak first. He was a good speaker. His voice was calm and reasonable. "Friends," he began, "we have been traveling for 50 years. A new generation has been born. They have never seen a river. They have never felt rain. They do not care about the politics of a planet that is now just a memory. This sadness, this looking back, is a weight we do not need to carry. I propose we formally end the Cultural Memory Project. The power and data storage we would save could be used to build new training simulators for our engineers, could help us grow more food. We need to invest in our future, not our past." There was a murmur of agreement from his supporters. Sumin stood up. She moved slowly, but her presence filled the room. She did not look at the council. She looked at the people. "Taeshik speaks of the future," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But what is the future of a people with no past? If we delete our stories, what will we tell our children when they ask where they come from? Will we say we are orphans of the void? That we come from nothing?" She turned to Taeshik. "The consensus did not just take our home. They tried to erase our right to exist. If we now do their work for them, then they have truly won. We will become ghosts. We will have ships and engines and full stomachs, but we will have no soul. The room was silent. The argument was old, but the pain was still fresh. Gene knew it was his turn. He pushed himself to his feet, his joints aching. All eyes turned to him. The old teacher. The man who had helped get them here. I have spent my life counting things, Gene said, his voice raspy. I have counted people, I have counted boxes, I have counted drops of water and seconds of oxygen. I know the cost of everything on this ship. He paused, looking at the tired, worried faces around him. But there are some things you cannot count. How do you count the value of a song? How do you measure the weight of a story? Taeshik is right that we need to be practical. Sumin is right that we need to remember. He took a deep breath. I propose a compromise. We do not end the Cultural Memory Project, but we hide it. We protect it. We move the primary archives to the most secure, low-power data cores on every ship in the fleet. We do not teach it in our main schools. We do not force the memory on those who find it too painful. But we keep it safe, like a seed bank. We do not know what the future holds. We do not know if our children, or our children's children, will need those seeds to remember who they are. The compromise was difficult. It made no one happy. But it was the only way to stop a fight that could break the fleet apart. After a long, tense debate, the council agreed. Later, Jean visited Sumin in her archive room. It was a small, quiet space, filled with data servers that glowed with a soft blue light. In the center, on a small table, was the physical book she had saved from Earth, the Panzori songbook. It was under a glass case. You are disappointed in me? Jean said that Sumin was looking at the book. No, brother. I am tired. You saved the archive. For now. But hiding it is like hiding a light under a basket. What is the point of having it if no one sees it? The point is that it exists, Jean said. It is a promise. A promise that one day, someone will be ready to see the light again. He looked at his sister. She seemed smaller now, the weight of a culture on her shoulders. He knew she spent her nights here, teaching small, secret classes to the few children whose parents were curious. She was keeping the flame alive, even if it was just a small spark. The fleet flew on. The arguments quieted, but they did not disappear. People focused on the daily work of survival, repairing ships, recycling water, growing food. The memory of Earth became a quiet, private pain for the old, and a boring legend for the young. Jean often went to the observation deck. There were no planets to look at now, only the endless, empty blackness, dotted with unfamiliar stars. They were completely alone. The consensus was far behind them, a forgotten nightmare. Or so they thought. The price of exile was not a single, sharp pain. It was a long, slow ache. It was the ache of a people trying to remember a song they had almost forgotten, humming a tune they weren't sure was right. The body of humanity was safe, flying through the void. But its heart, its memory, was hidden away in a dark, quiet room, waiting. The scout ship, the Starlight Seeker, moved through the empty space between stars. It was a small, fast vessel, built for exploration, not for war. Its job was to fly ahead of the main human fleet, looking for resources, for possible planets, for any sign of danger, or for anything at all. For 100 years, the fleet had found nothing but dust and silence. Inside the cockpit, Hannah checked her navigation screens for the 10th time. She was young, with sharp eyes and a mind that loved puzzles. She was Sumin's granddaughter, and she had inherited her grandmother's fierce curiosity. But while Sumin looked for answers in the past, Hannah looked for them in the unknown. She was one of the best pilots and data analysts in the new generation. Her co-pilot, a quiet man named Day, was sleeping in his chair. There was not much for two people to do on these long, boring flights. The ship's computer did most of the work. A soft, persistent beep broke the silence of the cockpit. Hannah's eyes snapped to the long-range sensor screen. It was showing something. A signal. Not a natural one. It was the faint, repeating pattern of a machine. A ship's distress beacon. Day, she said, her voice calm but tight with excitement. Wake up. We have a contact. Day was awake instantly. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the data. It's weak. Very old. It's the first non-human signal we've found in 20 years, Hannah replied, her hands already moving over the controls. We have to check it. She sent a quick message back to the Odyssey's promise, informing the council of their find and their change of course. Then she pointed the Starlight Seeker towards the signal. After a day of travel, they saw it. A ship. It was not like their own angular, practical designs. This ship was all curves and strange, organic shapes. It was also broken. A huge hole was torn in its side, as if something massive had clawed it open. It was dark and silent, spinning slowly in the void. It's a consensus freighter, Day whispered, his face pale. One of theirs. A cold fear settled in Hannah's stomach. The Galactic Consensus. The ones who had forced them from their home. For 100 years, they had seen no sign of them. They had hoped they were forgotten. But here was a piece of their enemy, dead and frozen in space. It's a derelict, Hannah said, forcing her voice to be steady. No life signs, no power readings except for that dying beacon. It's been here for a long time. The Council on the Odyssey's promise sent back orders. They were to observe only. Do not approach. The risk was too great. Hannah looked at the broken ship on her screen. It was a ghost. But ghosts could tell stories. They said observe, Hannah said today. They didn't say from how far. I'm taking us in closer. I want to scan its data core. Hannah, that is a very bad idea, Day said, his eyes wide. If there is any active security, if we trigger something, it's dead, Day. Look at it. It's been picked clean by scavengers or space rocks. But the core might be intact. It's shielded. We might learn something. What they are. Where they are. What they fear. Before Day could argue further, she fired the thrusters and moved the Starlight Seeker carefully towards the wreck. They moved in silence, the only sound the hum of their own ship. The derelict freighter grew larger on their view screen, a giant, dead sea creature. Hannah used a focus scanner to probe the ship. She found the main data core. It was damaged, but it was still holding a charge. Its security protocols were active, but they were old, a century out of date. This was her talent. Languages, codes, systems, they were all puzzles to her. She had learned the basics of the consensus's common language from the old archives. It was a cold, logical language, without words for many human emotions. For hours, she worked. Day watched the sensors for any sign of movement, any signal being sent out. The space around them remained silent. Hannah's screen flashed green. I'm in, she said, a smile touching her lips for the first time in days. She started downloading the freighter's logs, its manifests, its internal communications. It was mostly boring stuff. Cargo lists, engine performance reports, navigation charts. But then she found the crew's personal logs and the public news feeds that were stored in the database. What she read there, in that cold, logical language, slowly changed her understanding of everything. The Galactic Consensus was not the perfect, unstoppable force they had imagined. The news feeds talked about stability, but they also talked about a problem, a sickness of the spirit. They called it the Great Emptiness. It was a feeling of pointlessness, a lack of purpose. The logs of the crew members were even more revealing. They were filled with routine reports, but sometimes, a moment of something else would slip through. One log entry from the ship's captain, made just before the disaster that killed them, said, "The journey is efficient. The calculations are correct. Yet the silence between stars is heavy. I review the approved cultural data streams, but they offer no solace. They are perfect and they are empty." Hannah read about their society. They had not had a new major piece of art in thousands of years. Their science was about refining what they already knew, not discovering new things. They had removed conflict, they had removed strong emotion, they had removed everything they considered chaotic. And in doing so, they had removed the very things that gave life its color and meaning. They were not giants. They were fossils. A civilization that had built a perfect, beautiful, empty house and then forgotten how to leave it. "They're dying," Hannah said aloud, her voice full of wonder. "Not their bodies. Their everything. Their spirit. Day looked over from his station. What? They forced us to leave because we were too alive, too messy, too emotional. And now, they are suffering because they are not alive enough. She looked at the data on her screen. It was not a military victory. It was something sadder, and somehow much bigger. She knew this information was more valuable than any weapon. She prepared a compressed data packet containing everything she had found. She would send it back to the Odyssey's Promise as soon as they were at a safe distance. As they pulled away from the derelict ship, Hannah took one last look at it. It was not a symbol of fear anymore. It was a tombstone for a way of life that had chosen to stop living. The Starlight Seeker turned back towards the human fleet. They were still exiles. They were still alone. But Hannah now carried a secret. The monsters who had chased them from their home were not invincible. They were just lonely. And loneliness, she knew, was a hunger that could not be filled by logic and efficiency. It was a human hunger. And humanity, it turned out, had exactly what the consensus was starving for. The council chamber on the Odyssey's Promise was silent. The only sound was the faint, labored breathing of Jean. He was now so old and frail that they had brought his chair to the meeting. He sat with a blanket over his legs, his eyes closed, but everyone knew he was listening. Hannah stood in the center of the room, her data pad in her hand. She had just finished explaining everything she found on the derelict consensus ship. The silence felt heavy. Then, a man named June, a leader of the adaptationists, laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound. So, June said, leaning back in his chair, the great and powerful galactic consensus is bored? This is what you bring us, Hannah? This is not a threat. This is a joke. They are dying of boredom while we are still dying of old age and faulty air filters. It changes nothing. Hannah felt her face grow warm. It changes everything, she insisted, her voice firm. It means they are not perfect. They have a weakness. A weakness for what? June waved a hand. For feeling sad? How does that help us? Should we send them a gift of depressing poetry? Sumin, sitting beside her brother, spoke without raising her voice. You misunderstand, June. It is not a weakness for sadness. It is a weakness for feeling anything at all. They have spent millennia trying to erase emotion. And now their society is empty. They are starving for a purpose, for beauty, for meaning. All the things they threw away. June shook his head. This is philosophical nonsense. We need real solutions. We need to find a planet. We need to fix our ships. We do not need to worry about the emotional problems of the people who exiled us. The debate went back and forth. Some saw the potential. Most, like June, saw it as a useless curiosity. They were about to vote to simply file the information away when a raspy voice cut through the noise. They were wrong. Everyone turned. Jean had opened his eyes. They were clouded with age, but the intelligence in them was sharp as ever. Teacher, June asked, his tone more respectful now. Jean took a slow, shaky breath. They forced us to leave because they feared what we were. They thought our emotions, our art, our messy stories were a sickness. He paused, looking around the room. Hannah's discovery tells us that they now suffer from the cure. They are dying from the lack of the very sickness they feared. He looked at his sister, then at his granddaughter. They took our home, but we took our hearts with us. We have what they need, and a need is a lever. A need is a point of pressure. The room was quiet again, but now it was a thinking silence. What are you suggesting, Jean? Sumin asked softly. A new kind of war, Jean whispered. We will not fight them with lasers and missiles. They are too strong for that. We will fight them with a memory. We will fight them with a song. The plan was born in that moment. It was Hannah's idea, refined by Sumin's knowledge and given authority by Jin's quiet support. They would not attack the consensus. They would infect them. They called it the memory broadcast. Using the communication technology they had, they could send out tight, focused data streams. They would be like whispers on the solar wind, almost impossible to detect unless you were listening for them. They would broadcast directly into the core systems of the galactic consensus. But what to send? That was Sumin's domain.it could not be a direct message. Could not be a plea or a threat. It had to be art. It had to be pure, unfiltered human feeling. Sumin and Hannah spent days in the archive, the very place that had been almost shut down. They curated the broadcast like doctors choosing a medicine. They did not send one thing. They sent a collection, a symphony of human experience. They sent the tragic, desperate love of Romeo and Juliet. They sent the powerful, thundering hope of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. They sent the quiet, beautiful sadness of a Korean folk song about a lost love. They sent the thrilling fear from an old audiobook of a ghost story. They sent the simple, joyful laughter of children playing, recorded in a park on Earth a century ago. They sent the complex, painful choices from a Shakespeare play. They sent the determined spirit in the voice of a woman giving a speech about never giving up. They sent paintings, the wild, swirling stars of Van Gogh, the calm, mysterious smile of the Mona Lisa. They sent everything the consensus had tried to eliminate: passion, sorrow, joy, fear, hope, love, all the messy, beautiful, and painful colors of the human soul. Hannah and a small team of technicians she trusted worked in secret. They reprogrammed old communication buoys, turning them into silent broadcast stations. They used the gravitational pull of dead stars to slingshot the data streams, masking their point of origin. The broadcasts would seep into the consensus's communication networks, appearing as background noise, as random data packets, as cosmic static. The first broadcast was sent, a data stream containing the Panzori song from Sumin's book, followed by the powerful, building chords of a symphony meant to represent human struggle and victory. On the bridge of the Odyssey's promise, Hannah watched the screen as the signal vanished into the darkness. It felt like throwing a feather into a hurricane and hoping it would cause a storm. June and the other doubters shook their heads. It was a waste of energy, a fantasy. But Jean, sitting in his chair, gave a small, slow nod. Sumin stood straight, her hand resting on the glass case that held her songbook. They had no armies. They had no planets. They had no power. But they had a story, and they had just begun to tell it. The quiet war of the human heart had officially begun. Kale moved through the silent corridors of the data hub. His job was simple. He was a filter. His task was to monitor the endless streams of information that flowed into the consensus network and delete anything that was not perfect. Anything that was chaotic, irregular, or inefficient. It was boring work. It was perfect work for the consensus. For 117 cycles, Kale had done his job without a single error. His world was a place of soft, glowing light and gentle, humming sounds. There was no dirt, no loud noise, no strong smell. Everything was ordered. Everything was stable. He should have been content. But for a long time, Kale had felt a strange hollow feeling inside. He had no word for it. The consensus language had no word for it. It was just a quiet, empty space where something else should be. One day, a small, anomalous data packet appeared on his screen. It was tagged as low-priority cosmic interference. It was supposed to be automatically deleted, but for a reason he did not understand, Kale paused. The packet structure was strange. It was not clean and logical. It was messy. It was wrapped in layers of complex, beautiful code that looked like nothing he had ever seen. Curiosity was not encouraged, but the feeling was too strong. He isolated the packet and opened it. What emerged was not a report. It was not a list of numbers. It was a sound. A voice.it was a woman's voice, singing. The language was unknown to him, but the sound was not. The voice rose and fell. It was full of a powerful, aching emotion. It was a sound of deep loss and profound love, all mixed together. It was the Panzori song that Sumin had saved. The sound filled Kale's silent work chamber. It was the most beautiful and the most painful thing he had ever heard. It spoke to the empty space inside him. For the first time in his life, he felt a tear form in his eye. He did not even know what a tear was. He reached up and touched the wetness on his face with wonder. He saved the file. He hid it deep in his personal storage. He did not delete it. The next day, he found another strange packet. This one contained a story. His translation software struggled, but it managed to convey the tale of two young people from rival families who fell in love and died for it. It was illogical. It was chaotic. It was the most compelling thing Cale had ever read. He found himself thinking about it for days. He started to look for these strange packets. They were rare and well hidden, but he became an expert at finding them. He found images of paintings that showed wild, emotional brushstrokes. He found music that made him feel like he was flying. He found stories of great heroes and terrible villains. He was not the only one. Slowly, carefully, he shared one. A small, simple piece. A picture of a starry night that swirled with feeling. He sent it to a colleague he trusted. The colleague did not report him. Instead, she sent back a message. A single word, a word that was not in any official dictionary, but one that was starting to be whispered in the hidden corners of the consensus network. More. The human broadcasts were like a virus, but not a virus that killed the body. A virus that woke up the mind. The emotional plague, as the authorities would later call it, began to spread. An architect, who had only ever designed efficient, identical structures, saw a picture of an old, human cathedral with its towering, impossible beauty. The next day, she submitted a new design. It had curves. It had light that played in strange ways. It was rejected immediately, but the idea was now in her head. A composer, whose job was to create the same, calming, harmonic tones for meditation, heard a clip of Beethoven's symphony. He heard the struggle and the triumph in the music. That night, in secret, he created a new piece of music. It was loud. It was soft. It was angry and then peaceful. He played it for his mate, and for the first time they felt a shared excitement. The rigid, perfect society of the consensus began to develop cracks. Small, almost invisible cracks. Young ones started to gather in quiet groups, not to discuss efficiency, but to share the strange, wonderful things they had found. They called them spark files. The leadership of the consensus was slow to notice. When they did, they were confused. This was not an invasion. It was not a weapon. It was a mood, a feeling, a sickness of the spirit. They issued statements about the importance of stability. They told people to ignore the irregular data. They said it was a corruption, a malfunction. But you cannot order someone to unfeel something. You cannot delete a feeling from your heart by pressing a button. Cale sat in his perfect room, listening to the Panzori song again. He looked out his window at the perfect, clean city. He suddenly saw it for what it was. A cage. A beautiful, silent, and empty cage. He opened a secret communication channel to his friend. This sound, he typed, using a new, informal language they were creating. It makes the emptiness hurt less. It makes the emptiness feel shared. His friend wrote back, I know. I have found a story about a man who fought a giant with only a stone. It is not efficient, but it feels true. The great emptiness that had plagued the consensus was not gone. But now, for the first time, they had a name for it. And they had a mirror, held up by the exiles they had cast out, that showed them the hollow shape of their own souls. The price for their perfect, stable galaxy was becoming clear. It was costing them their very reason to live. And now that they had heard a human song, they were starting to think the price was too high. The silence on the bridge of the Odyssey's promise was heavy and full of fear. An alarm had sounded through the entire fleet. A single ship had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel right in front of them. It was not a human ship. Its design was all smooth, organic curves. It was a vessel of the galactic consensus. Panic spread like a cold wave. After all this time, they had been found. The exile was over. Now would come the destruction. Hannah stood at her station, her hands clenched into fists. She looked at the view screen, waiting for the attack. But no weapons fired. The consensus ship simply sat there, silent and imposing. Then, a communication request arrived. It was not a military frequency. It was a request for a council-level dialogue. The old council chamber, where so many arguments had taken place, was now filled with a tense quiet. June, who had always argued for forgetting the past, looked pale. Sumin stood straight, her face unreadable. Jean was there too, carried in his chair. He was so old and weak now, but his eyes were clear. He looked at the main screen as the connection was made. An alien appeared on the screen. It was tall and slender, with large, dark eyes and smooth gray skin. It wore simple, elegant robes. This was Ambassador Vale. His expression was not angry. It was confused. It was tired. "People of the Exodus Fleet," the alien said, its voice translated by the ship's computer into soft, flat tones. "I am Vale of the Galactic Consensus. We have traced a disturbance to your location." No one spoke. They waited. "The disturbance is a data stream," Vale continued, his large eyes blinking slowly. "It contains irregular, chaotic patterns. It is causing instability. It must cease." Hannah felt a thrill of triumph mixed with fear. Their broadcasts had worked. They had been noticed. June stepped forward. "We are simply traveling. We mean no harm. We do not know of any data stream." Vale's head tilted. "The data is of your origin. The content is human. It is a poison, creates longing, creates dissatisfaction, creates feeling. You are disrupting the great stability. You must stop." It was then that Jean spoke. His voice was a dry whisper, but everyone heard it. "You called it a poison." The ambassador looked at the old man in the chair. "It is an accurate description. It sickens the mind." Jean took a slow, shaky breath. "You forced us to leave our home because you said we were a sickness. You believed our emotion was a flaw." He paused, gathering his strength. "Now you travel across the stars to find us. Not because we threaten your ships, not because we threaten your lives, but because we remind you of what you lost." Vale was silent. The truth of the words hung in the air. "You took our home," Jean continued, his voice growing a little stronger. "But we held onto our hearts. You have 1,000 perfect worlds, but you live in a silent, empty house. And now you have heard a song from outside your door, and you find that the silence you created is unbearable." The ambassador did not deny it. He could not. The evidence was in the quiet unrest spreading through his own people. "What is your demand?" Vale asked finally. A hint of something new, defeat. In his translated voice, Sumin stepped forward now. She stood beside her brother. "We have no demands," she said. "The broadcast is not a threat. It is just what we are. It is a story. It is a song. To stop it would be to stop being human. And we have already given up too much." She looked at the alien, her gaze steady. "The price is not something we are asking you to pay. The price is what you have already paid. You traded your soul for stability. And now you have discovered that the trade was not worth it." The communication ended shortly after. The consensus ship did not fire. It did not threaten them. It simply turned and leaped back into faster-than-light travel, disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. They were gone. The immediate danger was over, but something more important had happened. Later, Hannah went to the main greenhouse. It was her turn to teach the children. A group of 10 young boys and girls sat on the floor, their eyes on her. They had never seen an alien. They had never seen a planet. But they knew the stories. One little girl pointed at the observation window. "Will the bad people come back?" Hannah knelt down. "I don't think so," she said softly. "Why not? Are we hiding again?" Hannah smiled and shook her head. "No. We are not hiding. We are just being ourselves. And that is enough." She took out a small player. She did not play a recording of an engine or a computer. She played the Panzori song. The same one her grandmother had saved. The same one that had started it all. The woman's voice, full of ancient sorrow and love, filled the green, growing space. The children listened. They did not fully understand the words, but they felt the feeling. It was a story of home. It was a story of loss. It was a story of being human. Outside, the fleet sailed on through the endless night. They were still exiles. They still had no planet to call their own. But they had each other, and they had their stories. The price for trying to erase humanity had been paid in full. It was the price of a soul. And as the song filled the ship and drifted out into the stars, it was clear that the humans, though homeless, were forever rich where it mattered most.